Hey y'all, welcome to Pratt Made That, and the first video of the two-part series where I will build our home library. This video specifically is going to focus on the base cabinets, the bookshelves themselves, and the spanner. So let's get to it. I'll start by ripping everything down to a rough size and then taking them to the table saw to cut to final dimensions and get square edges. Then at the miter saw, cross-cut them to size. Back at the table saw, I'm ripping the stretchers that will make up the base cabinets using wood from the old bookshelf. To assemble these cabinets, I'm simply going to use pocket hole joinery and some wood glue. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how to build cabinets because there's plenty of videos on YouTube already with how to do so. One little tip on pocket hole joinery though, always clamp up your pieces, otherwise as you go to drill in to the opposing piece, they tend to move on each other, so clamps is always good practice. So my design required 3 base cabinets that are almost identical. The only difference is the 2 end cabinets have a solid divider. My reasoning behind this was because they have to take the weight of the bookshelf on top of it, whereas the middle does not. The last thing I want to mention for the base cabinets is that they are all 18 inches deep, including the face frame. Speaking of face frame, that's what I'm moving on to next. I had to build my face frames to allow my doors to have a 1/2 inch overhang, as well as enough space on the bottom for a 3.5 inch piece of baseboard. And just like the cabinets, these two will be assembled with pocket screws and wood glue. Once assembled, I'll do a quick sanding to flush up all of the joints, and then I will tack them on to the front of the base cabinets. One thing to keep in mind when doing face frames is giving yourself a reveal. I went with an 1/8 inch reveal. It looks cleaner on the ends, and also if the cabinets are out of square, you can easily scribe a line and sand off some of that face frame to make the cabinets fit together nicely. Once that's done, I'm moving on to the top. Because I wanted the top to be solid and my shelves are 12 feet wide, I had to combine 2 pieces. To do so, I'm just going to simply use a tongue and groove joint. After letting that sit overnight in the clamps, I went back to the table saw, ripped some of the edge banding, and using some wood glue and 18 gauge brad nail, started tacking it in place. As I started to use my flush trim bit to make the banding even with the plywood, I unfortunately ran into a void in the plywood. So my solution was to cut the veneer off, use some Bondo, and then sand it off. Because the top was going to be painted like the rest of the shelf, I would never see it. Then while I was at it, I decided to put Bondo on all of the joints to ensure that I had no black gaps show up after I painted it white. Now moving on to the upper bookshelves, which are constructed in a very similar fashion to the base cabinets. After ripping and cutting the plywood to size, I cut a 3/8 inch deep rabbet in the back to accept a 1/4 inch piece of plywood. That extra 1/8 of an inch should give me just enough space to feed my 24 gauge wire down the back that feeds all of the LED lights. And just like before, we're going to assemble these with glue, pocket holes, and being sure to clamp up when screwing things together. And again, just like the base cabinets, we're going to rip, cut, and assemble the face frame with glue and pocket holes. Ignore the two dados that are running down the stiles of the face frame. That was originally for wire because I was going to put LED tape light inside every shelf, but decided otherwise down the road. For the shelves themselves, again I'm recycling wood from the old shelf, cutting them to size, and then ripping a 1.5 inch strip that'll be tacked onto the front of every shelf. For a cleaner look, I then went ahead and put an 1/8 inch roundover on the strip that goes on the front of the shelf, as well as the cleats that will attach to the side of the shelf. Then, using the 1/8 inch shim as a reference, I'll tack on all the shelf fronts. To attach the cleats to the side, I'm using a sacrificial reference that gives me my spacing so that it's accurate on every cleat all the way up the shelves. For the cleats on the two sides, it's simple glue and 18 gauge brad nails. For the cleats that go up the middle, because that is a recycled piece of wood and it is painted, I didn't want to rely on just nails and glue. So, earlier you saw me drilling holes for dowels, and I have two dowels that run through the cleat, the middle sheet of plywood, and the cleat on the opposite side. Once that's done, I will tack on the face frames, give it a little sanding, and move on to the inner trim. The trim itself is 3/8 inch thick and has a simple chamfer on it. To get the tightest joints possible when doing trim like this, it's best to go real time and don't rely on just measurements. Also, be sure to mark which direction you have to cut your angle because it's very easy to mess that up. Now, to get a clean, professional look, I'm going back, putting wood filler in all the holes, and I'm also caulking every joint. Because I'm painting this white, any little gaps will show up as a black line. Originally, when doing the crown molding, I started with the backer blocks, and that made it more difficult to line everything up. So I took them off, put the two ends and then the front on, holding it all together with a few 23 gauge pin nails, then went back and put the blocks in after to hold everything nice and secure. And finally, closing out this video, we will do what I call the spanner, which goes between the two bookshelves. It's simply a box where I did a 1/4 inch dado, filled it with 1/4 inch plywood, and then put some crown molding around it with some backer blocks. Alrighty y'all, that's a wrap on part 1. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and also click on the notifications button so you are aware when part 2 comes out. Part 2 is going to be focusing on the doors, the bench behind me, these middle shelves, as well as the overall assembly of how I put it together. So don't miss it, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye for now.